mom, who's a breast cancer survivor, endured price gouging on their medicines while on Medicare. Today, Democrats in Congress are changing that. We're going to stand up to Big Pharma and let Medicare negotiate lower prices and cap out-of-pocket costs at $2,000 as well as capping the cost of insulin. For too long, Congress has refused to address the climate crisis and invest in clean energy. Today, Democrats in Congress are changing that. Through the largest ever investment to fight climate change, this bill will cut emissions by 40% by 2030 and unleashes American and, yes, Texas-made clean energy while creating 9 million jobs. Thanks to President Biden and Democrats in Congress, this historic legislation will impact our nation for generations to come, all while reducing the deficit and without raising taxes on folks making less than $400,000 a year. It's a big deal, and I cannot wait to vote yes for it. I encourage my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 1.5 minutes to my good friend from Louisiana, Mr. Graves.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. Everybody in this chamber supports lowering prescription drug costs, lowering these outrageous costs that all of our constituents are paying across the country. We all support clean, affordable energy and access to those resources. And we all support lowering inflation. The difference is where the credibility gap exists is that the very problems, the very crisis that our country is experiencing today were actually caused by the Biden administration's policies. We went from, in my hometown, $1.80 a gallon for gasoline to I recently paid $4.20. We've seen a tripling of natural gas costs. Their own policies have caused this. Nearly a quarter of all Americans today can't even afford to pay their electricity bills. The Biden administration policies have caused record inflation, making Americans unable to even afford grocery costs. The Biden administration policies have resulted in higher emissions, not lower emissions, as compared to the previous administrations. And Biden administration policies have resulted in this president going to countries like Saudi Arabia and asking them for energy while telling Americans that we can't produce. Mr. Speaker, I can't help but reminisce over Jack Abramoff, a disgraced lobbyist convicted who created problems, then charged clients to fix it. The difference is between this bill and Jack Abramoff is that Jack Abramoff actually fixed the problems for his clients. This bill's a disaster. There's a credibility gap. They've caused the problems. Now we're being asked to trust them to fix it, and we simply can't. Oppose this legislation. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Missouri reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Louisiana, a distinguished member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, Mr. Carter.
Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Far too many things in life just aren't fair. However, one thing should, frankly, always be fair, and that's taxes. What should always be fair is access to insulin, access to clean energy, and relief from the raging energy costs that we see across our country. This historic Inflation Reduction Act is fully paid for by requiring the biggest corporations and the ultra-wealthy to pay their fair share. And it does so without any new taxes on small businesses or those making under $400,000. I said $400,000. We can achieve this goal by strengthening IRS enforcement against wealthy tax cheats, closing tax loopholes exploited by the wealthiest few, 150 massive corporations. In opposing these provisions, my Republican colleagues are sadly aligning themselves with mega corporations and the ultra-wealthy and turning their backs on the American people. I'm proud that this bill, Democrats are once again putting people over politics, fighting for the American people. I urge full support for this measure.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to submit analysis from the nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation, which confirms that the bill increases taxes by $10.6 billion on individuals making under $200,000 in 2023 and increases taxes by $32.6 billion across all incomes.
Without objection, so ordered. The gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 1 minute from the good gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the ranking member. Mr. Speaker, the American people are sick and tired of runaway government promises of how excessive spending, tax increases, and Green New Deal special interest investments are somehow going to make their lives better and reduce inflation. Yet we are here today in this chamber to raise taxes on the American people, hire 87,000 new IRS auditors forevermore, Mr. Speaker, and pass over $500 billion in new government spending. All in the name of Inflation Reduction Act? Mr. Speaker, is this some sort of joke? Do we actually think that the American people believe that? Well, they don't. And by the way, regarding the $400,000 less won't get taxed, if a pass-through business makes $400K and the partners pay themselves $100,000 each, they will fall under the audit initiative by the IRS. As well, the projections for the IRS hiring do not count into you only taxing those over $400K. So the whole thing was made up to make it sound better than it is.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I urge a no.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Missouri reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm now pleased to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Nevada, a distinguished member of the Budget Committee, Mr. Horsford.
Gentleman from Nevada is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the chairman, thank you for yielding. I will cast my vote today to lower the cost of prescription drugs, tackle the climate crisis, and make big corporations pay their fair share in taxes while putting people over politics. Mr. Speaker, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle love to rant about fiscal responsibility, but the facts are clear. Every time a Republican president and congressional majority collude for their corporate friends and rich elite, our deficits soar. So it's up to Democrats to clean up that mess. In this Inflation Reduction Act is a historic down payment on deficit reduction of approximately $300 billion to fight inflation. For years, Nevadans have seen their cost of living rise, while my Republican colleagues across the aisle have focused on giving away tax cuts for the wealthy. Well, today, we vote for seniors in my district and across America who want one thing from Congress right now, and that is to lower prescription drug prices. So today, we will cast our votes to pass the Inflation Reduction Act because it includes an important provision to cap out-of-pocket drug costs at $2,000 for seniors and caps insulin costs at $35 a month for seniors and individuals with disabilities. And finally, the Inflation Reduction Act includes a historic step to combat the climate crisis, including $4 billion to states like Nevada to combat the effects of the 2 decades-long Western drought.
Expired.
I urge this body to pass this legislation for the people, putting people over politics.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentleman